I think it's a more difficult subject for sure, which is performance reviews and, how skills can help us in our performance reviews overall. I do have the chat open. I'm happy to answer questions as I'm going through. So I'll kind of keep an eye on the chat for those of you who like asking questions as we're going. And let's dive right in. Okay, my slides do not all look like this. This is my wordiest slide, and I think it's most important. Let's start with what is a performance review? So this is the Wikipedia definition. Performance review, also known as a performance appraisal, is a process in which the employee's job performance is evaluated by their manager or supervisor. This evaluation can include feedback on areas of strength, areas for improvement, as well as goals for the coming year. Performance reviews are typically conducted annually or biannually and are intended to provide employees with an opportunity to receive feedback on their work, identify areas where they can improve, set goals for the future, and the feedback provided during a performance review can help employees understand how they are perceived within the organization. That is the goal. The question is that easier said than done? And I think we all know the answer is yes. So, why do performance reviews matter? So, in my opinion, the most important is engagement. I believe performance reviews are two ways. Is this employee satisfied? Can we help them be more productive? What is it that this person needs to succeed in their role? I think that's a big part of performance reviews. And, feedback. It's a great place to give the people on your team valuable feedback on their job performance. I think I talked about it in that definition, but what they're doing well, what they can improve, and really, I think, provide that information that helps someone understand their strengths or weaknesses. It's not always easy to be self-aware about everything. And so I think the right employee really appreciates that information, and really giving a roadmap for performance. And, one thing I always do in a more formal performance review is I ask for feedback on myself also. Anything I can do better, anything I can do better to enable you. I think it's really important not to forget that piece of it. And goal setting. I laugh when I think about this one because when I was at BMO, and for those of you who worked in big companies, the way goal setting worked was they always come from the top down. And at BMO, fiscal year ended in October. And by the time the goals got to our team, it would always be October of the year we were giving the reviews. And then we'd go through this really stressed out period where we start pushing the goals to people. And then people are evaluating themselves against goals for the past 12 months that they just received basically 4 weeks ago. And it was always a bit of a disaster. But really, in theory, this is where, managers and their team members can set goals, track the progress. And, it's important to have that combination of long-term and short-term. And of course, I'm sure you all know this, you want goals to be specific, relevant, measurable. And this is where skills is really going to come in. Alignment. We talk a lot about this. If any of you have come to any of our sessions on learning and development, aligning employee goals and employee desires with the needs and the mission of the company. This is a great place to do it and to really ensure that you're on the same page, because that's going to be really important for engagement, retention, overall job satisfaction. One of the other really important pieces is, of course, recognition. This is the time that you have that opportunity to reward someone for their hard work, note down their achievements. And, of course, great way to recognize is a promotion or a pay increase. But you'll also have people that what they want is to be given additional responsibilities and opportunities to prove themselves. And lastly, development. This is a great tool to really give someone that constructive criticism, identify areas they need to improve, identify areas they're doing great, and you can give enhanced responsibilities and put that together into a real growth plan. And I think it's important to really have follow-up steps on this piece. I've in the past been in organizations where we were great at this. The end of the year, we would document these growth plans, but then no one would ever look at them again. And so in the end, it wasn't really providing a lot of value. And, why do companies want to do performance reviews? So I think there's a bunch of reasons, improve performance. When you can identify the weaknesses of someone and have a plan, you can get performance up. This is always going to be really important. Really also create and foster stronger relationships. Communication, I think we all know, any type of relationship, romantic, friendship, business, like open communication is always going to be number one. The more you're being honest with someone, the more they're going to feel comfortable being honest with you, and the better you're both going to, work together and achieve. And data and insights. I think if you don't have that data and insights, it can be really hard to make decisions throughout the year. How do you know which employees should be rewarded? The last thing you want to do is give that reward or promotion to the person who did something great most recently. You want to make sure that you have all the information, and so you have all the data when you're making these decisions, because as we know, sometimes bonuses, promotions, they're very limited. And I know it's boring, but I think we should mention it. Legal protection. I'm sure we have all laid people off. I'm sure some of us have been involved in lawsuits, and it's important that this is a step that you're taking. But more importantly, why do those of us in HR really like performance reviews? I think I didn't rank them, but I do think one of the most important is this data and metrics. For human resources and people operations to do their job right, you need to be able to identify trends, develop targeted training programs, and decide what kind of budget is needed for pay raises, who's going to need to be promoted, what other rewards can we do as a company. And the data and metrics that can be gleaned from performance reviews is really important, and then used for performance improvement. You can see, we have a lot of people lacking in, probably number one, it comes up for us all the time in our sales demos, leadership. We have a big problem. Our leaders aren't conducting great performance reviews. They're not giving on the spot coaching. This is a great time to figure out what does the organization need as a whole. Ensuring that the company is operating at peak efficiency. There's just so much great stuff you can learn. And again, I'll land on something more boring, but compliance, of course, this is such an important part of HR, and anyone on HR team is going to want to really make sure that performance reviews are being done properly. But performance reviews are really hard. I said it at the start. Do we love them? Do we hate them? I think I, feel both ways about performance reviews. Number one is they're subjective. And, I've seen this so much, and I'll go back to another story where, in bigger organizations, you often are limited to how many exceptional ratings you can give out, for example. And so, I can talk to one of my peers and see who he's rating exceptional. And I remember sitting there and thinking, yeah, but your exceptional people are worse than my average people. But, it's so subjective across leaders. And that's a really, really hard thing to deal with. And skills can help in this. So we'll get to that. And then lack of data. I rarely see an organization that really has the data they need to support a proper performance review, especially because performance reviews are mostly based just on the direct managers' perceptions. And so this lack of data can make it really, really hard to substantiate the performance ratings, and more importantly, to have really actionable outcomes for the employees in a way that's fair. And lastly, poor communication. It's a really big challenge to do a performance review if you didn't first sit down or end last year's performance review with setting clear expectations, clear goals. How are you going to evaluate someone to give that meaningful feedback? And, one more, what is it that most organizations are getting wrong? And the first one might be a little counterintuitive, but the worst thing is you go into a performance review and someone's just telling you, oh, well, 12 months ago, you did this wrong. And 11 months ago, you did this wrong, versus saying, here are, opportunities for improvement, sandwiching in some good things with some things that need improvement. It's really all about giving someone the guidance on how to improve, but not layering on so much negative feedback that they're not able to hear any of the good. And this leads me to, what I have in the middle, neglecting to provide ongoing feedback. The truth is, the best feedback is given in real time. And so, I think I just said it in the last point. You're saying, oh, well, 12 months ago you did this, and 11 months ago you did this. It's really hard to explain. I sat there once with a boss I had who I'll say he wasn't great, but he said, like, you do a lot of this. And I said, well, can you give me an example? No example. You do a lot of that. Well, can you give me an example? No example. And at the end, I was like, well, here's why I think I'm good at these things. And I could see by the end, he was like, okay, yeah, maybe you are. And I was like, this is a weird meeting. You don't want to do that. If you see someone, the best way, coach on the spot, make a suggestion. It makes it a lot easier at the end of the year. You don't want people coming into these performance reviews terrified, which is how it works in most organizations, even when you've done a really good job. And lastly, really failing to tie the goals of the employee with the goals of the business. Because the problem may be you've given an employee goals, but the employee worked towards the business goals, which makes sense. They work in the business, they know what's going on. And then at the end of the year, you have someone who actually performed really high, but didn't meet the goals they set. How do you really reconcile that? So you really want to make sure that everything is aligned and tied in together. And so, if we look at the problem with traditional performance reviews, this rank and yank, which is like, let's rank everyone against each other. That's so outdated. We should not be using that anymore. The one size fits all approach. Companies often use the same performance review for all employees, regardless of their role, regardless of their responsibilities. This can fail to account for unique skills and competencies required for different types of jobs, and it can lead to evaluations that are not accurate and not relevant. And then inconsistent application. This to me is one of the biggest flaws. And I remember in one of the startups I worked in that was on the larger side, the way I did my performance reviews is I had decided to rank people 40% on, I think it was 40% on their individual performance, 40% on team performance. It was a sales driven org, and 20% on learning and development. And I set goals for everyone within those categories. We met quarterly and we ranked. And, at the end of the year, I calculated the bonuses, and then I, told my boss what I did. I had told HR what I was doing in advance. And then I went to Florida. And, I got a message from the CEO saying, like, WTF are your bonuses? My numbers were a little weird because of how I had calculated them. And he was pretty annoyed with me. And then I told him, and he said, I owe you an apology. Every other leader in the company just gave out full bonuses. And I said, okay, well, I'm glad you're happy with the thought I put into it, but is my team going to miss out because everyone else is getting full bonuses? And he said, no, you're the only one who's getting what they asked for. You're able to justify it. And I thought to myself, like, this just isn't fair. Like, everyone should be, facing at least somewhat of a similar judging criteria when it comes to performance reviews and then bonuses. Of course, companies want to get the most out of their performance reviews, but we need to take a more strategic and thoughtful approach. Ongoing feedback, tailoring evaluations to unique needs of the different roles and the different people, and tying performance to business goals so you can create that, performance management process that everyone feels good about. So, let's just look at the current best practices before I move on to skills. So, it all starts with, and these are the best practices, but really hard, and I don't see a lot of companies following them. So number one is, that ongoing feedback that I've, very meaningfully put at the top there, providing regular feedback throughout the performance period. Don't wait till the end of the year. It's not better for anyone. And then clear expectations. At the beginning of that performance review cycle, set the clear expectations, not just with the employee, but the leadership team should also make sure that they know what they're aligning employees towards. Everyone should know what success will look like for each team and therefore for each person. And this also helps people throughout the year understand why they're doing what they're doing. No, you want to use objective, you want to be, you want to use objective criteria. Make sure that you have these KPIs. Some goals might be a bit vague, but you need to have goals that are tangible and that people can really work towards. We haven't talked about it yet, but self-assessment. I think it's really great as a leader to be able to read someone's evaluation of themselves before I go and evaluate. One, because you want to understand where someone's coming from so you can deliver feedback in the best way possible. But two, you don't see everything and know everything. And sometimes someone's self-assessment might even change your mind on something. 360 feedback. I have to say, when I joined the bank and they were doing 360 feedback, it was the first time I had ever seen it. And I felt really uncomfortable about it. All of a sudden, the performance review cycle was coming and I started getting all these emails like, tell me what you think of this person, tell me what you think of that person. And it almost felt gossipy. But then as I started doing it myself, I realized how beneficial it was. I had one particular employee who he liked hands-on management. And he told me, like, here's what I need to improve on. We worked on it. And when I did 360 feedback without even prompting people, they said, like, this person's communication has improved. Their writing is so much better. They're speaking more clearly and concisely. And I thought, wow, like, I actually wouldn't have known that because they don't communicate with me that way. And so actually 360 feedback, you have to make sure you do it properly. I think it's a really good part of a performance review. And then make it about future development. This is really an opportunity to discuss, what do you want to do in the future? What do we see upcoming as this company grows or as the company evolves? And what do you think, even not just you want to achieve, but you think this team can achieve? And what role do you want to play in it? And what skills can we give to you, to make this happen? And lastly, provide training for your managers. I think performance reviews aren't easy. A lot of people obviously like giving better news over worse news, even though I would say most employees I talk to want that constructive feedback. When you walk away from a performance review that's all good, I often think like, okay, but what can I do better? And so you really need to give that training. And so where do we start if we want to move into a skills first approach? So number one, no surprise, and I'm sorry if this is, repetitive for those of you who have come to anything we've done before, but you have to determine the skills of your people and the proficiency of those skills. And I think one of the mistakes a lot of companies make when they do this is they only look at the first two sets of skills, which is, job skills and learned skills. And these are still important because we know what we hire people to do. We don't necessarily know what they can do. Someone might be doing continuing education that we weren't aware of. So important to get this, but we also want to know skills that someone's gaining outside of their job. Volunteer work is a great example. I would attribute all my success in my early career to volunteer work. Nothing to do with what I was doing in my job. Not that I didn't enjoy and love my job, but especially when you're younger, like in a volunteer capacity, people will let you do things you're incredibly not qualified for, set you up with mentors to teach you, and you can really gain so much. And if someone's so passionate that they're spending their own personal time outside of work to gain and use these skills for good, why wouldn't you want to leverage that as an organization and reward the employee for developing those skills? And then, of course, life experience. We all have different lived experience. We all go through different things. We have different family lives, different personal lives. This is not just a great way to better understand the skills of the people on your team, but it's a great way to let people know that we want you to bring your whole self to work. And so it's just a really feel good and nice thing to do. And then really important, and you'd think we all have this, but you need to understand the skills needed for each of your roles and break them down. Like, what are the skills that someone should have in this role? What are the skills that it's nice to have in this role? What are the bonus skills? And really important for all three, what is the proficiency? And I think this is important to be able to guide people on a growth and development level. but also important as you're moving people into a role to understand, what are the skills we need someone to have on day one? If this is the role they're looking to move into, what are the skills that we're willing to train someone to have and build development plans towards if they're already in the role? This is a great exercise, really outside of performance reviews. And it's also great to include this in a job description. So I know I'm getting a little bit off topic, but how often does it happen that the way we build a job description is we go on Google, or maybe now we're going on ChatGPT, and we're saying like, hey, build me a job description for a marketing manager. And then what pops up sounds really salesy. We think it's going to attract people to the role, but it doesn't talk about any of the right things. And then you get in someone you love, but they don't actually have the skills. It's better for everyone. Really understand the skills of your roles. And then how can we leverage those in performance reviews? So, once we understand the skills of our people and the skills of our roles, it's a lot easier to do everything. So one is, can get a lot of clarity when it comes to expectation settings. Because now we can say to someone, okay, what's required for this role is, I don't actually recommend using numbers, but it's hard to explain if I don't say it. So, we require someone who has a level 4 proficiency here. You are at a 2. Let's make a plan to get you from 4 to 2. And then you have the criteria for how you assess someone at each level. And then it's so easy for someone to understand the expectations, easy for them to demonstrate that growth, and then easy for you to evaluate someone at the end of the year against these expectations. And you can even take this a step further and really help someone understand, not just, in a measured and specific way, how the skills are evaluated, but also have them understand how those skills are going to apply to specific pieces of work. So of course, you always want to tie the skill development into the work. So it's, you're operating at a level 2, this is the work you're doing. When you get to a 3, here's the type of work I'm going to assign you. When they get there, you start assigning them that work. When they get to the next level, you're assigning them greater pieces of work. And now they're seeing how their investment in themselves to develop skills, along with the company's support, is also getting them that more challenging work and better opportunities. And it's just so much easier to really understand for both parties. It's also easier to do that 360 feedback, because now it's not super subjective. When I send an email, it's like, hey, what do you think of Alicia? I'm like, hey, what do you think of, Alicia's ability in these 10 skills? And the whole company understands what your level like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is. So it's really easy for them to comment, and you can bring some fairness to the performance review process. You also are really able to shift your focus of reviews to development. And so you can take that positive approach when you're talking about what someone's deficiencies may be and how they're going to be able to develop them. And even better, you can provide someone with really specific training, because you're not saying like, oh, this project was delivered okay, I think you could deliver it better. What am I supposed to do with that feedback? It's a lot easier if we say, oh, this project was delivered slower than expected. I think it's because you need to get better in these 2 skills to this proficiency level. Like, you can just get so much more clear on what someone needs to do to succeed. And it also makes those awkward, check-ins, quarterly reviews, monthly, whatever you're doing, honestly, just makes them an easier conversation and less awkward, because you've set such clear expectations. Someone is hopefully able to visualize and see their progress. And so when you're going into one of these check-ins, I think you're probably getting people that aren't just not nervous, but they're excited about it, because they're like, oh, I know that I've, met this goal, I've exceeded this goal, I've missed this goal, but I know why. I'm going to know how to rectify it. Like, everyone can just be so much more prepared. And, the nicest part is there's just more obvious successes and more opportunities to celebrate success, because now you can celebrate when someone has an upskill, when they've gained a new skill, when they've used these skills to deliver more challenging work. Maybe they've used their more seasoned ability in a skill to mentor and bring somebody else's skill up. There's just so many more things you can celebrate. And of course, that's what we really want to make sure we're doing. And, just a bonus, if you're doing your performance reviews this way, it will foster a culture of continuous learning, recognition of employee strengths, and providing that development that links the employee's goals with the company needs. Performance reviews in your leadership development program, like they should be best friends. And I'm obviously biased, but I really think this is true. And I think that having a culture of learning is so, so hard. And it's hard because, like most things, it comes top down. If you don't have senior leaders that are learning and developing themselves, it's really hard to have a culture of learning. But if you've ingrained it so much into your performance and feedback culture, then you have other ways that you can really create it. And so how do we implement skills-based performance reviews? So one is, you have to get the right tool. That's just the hard fact. You can try to do this in Excel, but it's very challenging because skills, not just for individuals, but also for your roles, they're always changing. And so you really need something that can adapt and that you don't have to run complex formulas on. So figure out which tool is right for your organization to document and track and extract data from. And then you have to develop the process. Of course, every organization is different. If you're in a smaller company, for example, I think that you can really just ingrain the continuous feedback into your one-on-ones. And you probably don't need to really set too many formal meetings. If you're in a big organization, obviously a little bit of formality is needed, but your organization's better than me. And then train the people leaders. The worst thing that could happen is you go and you launch out to the company this great new way you're doing performance reviews. Hey, we're going to figure out all your skills. We have all the skills for our roles. We're going to be able to give you these great plans. We're going to be able to track against them. And then you have some leaders that, one, don't understand, or two, haven't bought in and aren't executing properly. And then you still have this unfairness in a process that's supposed to bring more equitability to your reviews. And you really want to make sure that that is not what you're doing. And so come back to a similar slide, but what are the new best practices if we take a skills-based approach? So I say it's similar, but this simplified ongoing feedback is what's going to be great. As I've already explained, I don't want to be too repetitive. It just makes it really easy to track people in real time. And sometimes without even just observation, like you'll have tools that are doing it as well. So really easy to have that ongoing feedback. You'll have clearer expectations than you would previously. Employees will know which skills are required for their job. They'll know which proficiency level. And they're more likely to focus on developing those skills. And, this will give them the better performance, greater job satisfaction. And what I think is another bonus of this is you'll also be able to identify and close skills gaps, which just overall will help in the success of the execution of the organization. You'll see more personal growth. You're giving more opportunities for people to develop not just new skills, but relevant skills. And they'll have that sense of accomplishment because if someone goes out, learns something that maybe the organization doesn't need, they come back, they don't have the opportunity to demonstrate that they've gained this new skill, that sense of accomplishment is replaced generally by a sense of frustration. And that's definitely not the vibe that you want to be putting out there. Doing it this way, you'll increase motivation and probably increase someone's commitment to their role because you've shown what a commitment you have to them. The adaptability is great because job requirements change over time. When you're focused on skills, you can really help your people adapt and acquire the new skills as the skills for their jobs are changing, which helps them stay competitive in the job market, remain valuable to the employer, and helps you be able to remain competitive. So there's just like wins going on all around this way. And, you have a bigger sense of collaboration because everyone in the org now has this shared focus on developing skills. It's something people talk about. Maybe you're even giving out badges for new skills gained, skills upskilled. And this also, again, ties into performance. You can have a leaderboard. You could do hours learned, although some people are faster and slower than others. But there's tons of metrics that you can track and, gamify and make it really fun. And it's just greater innovation when people are working together this way. And it's also just a lot more clear on how to achieve those KPIs. And then performance management. This is what it all comes down to. You've got your clear framework for performance management. You've aligned the performance expectations with the skill expectations, and the people leaders that you've hired can provide that really targeted feedback along with the ongoing support for development. And of course, the alignment to company goals. And, while we're here, what are the other benefits of skills for strategies? I have this one little icon that's moving. I thought I'd take it out, but then I thought it was also maybe a little bit fun. Increased engagement. When you're focused on skills, you can improve the employee engagement because you're providing those opportunities for learning and growth. When people are learning and growing, they feel valued. When they feel valued, they're more productive. When they're more productive, you're giving them more opportunities. And, this cycle of engagement and commitment just continues in their work. And, I thought the wheels turning made sense because the productivity gain is really big by focusing on skills. You can ensure that what you're training people towards are the right skills for their job, help them perform everything that they need to do, efficiently and effectively. And this will just give you better business outcomes while you have happier employees. And, identifying and closing skills gaps. You identify the gaps, you can take targeted actions towards them. And this includes, providing training or hiring new employees with the required skills. You can make better hires, set people up for success, and continue to invest in them. And this is all I think most of us really want. At the same time, you're future-proofing your workforce. This isn't a workshop on skills overall, but I think everyone here probably knows the skills for jobs have changed. And it's about 25% in the last 7 years. I always say 5, it's supposed to double in the next 5. And, if we're not constantly reevaluating the skills needed for our jobs, the skills the people in those jobs have, and then closing those gaps, we're going to leave a lot of revenue on the table. The number is $8.5 trillion of unrealized revenue by 2030 in the US alone. You don't want your company to be a part of this unrealized revenue for the reason that you didn't invest in future-proofing your workforce. And of course, retention. The number one reason someone leaves their job is lack of development. If you're providing those meaningful development opportunities, people are likely to stay twice as long at your organization. And lastly, cost savings. Costs a lot of money to replace someone who leaves. Costs a lot of money when someone isn't productive or lacks skills. Costs money when you have to outsource something, even though you have the skills internally. So there's a lot of great cost savings in here as well. I only have one more slide, so if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. Plus, I'm starting to lose my voice because I'm not used to talking so much. But the conclusion, really overall, that focus on skills-based reviews, it can help not just improve the way you're doing reviews and the confidence that your people leaders have in doing the reviews, but because you have those clear expectations, it can result in better employee performance, better skill development, and just an overall more productive workforce. And thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or just ask them. I think we have a smaller group, although I can't officially see everyone who's in here. We also have a very quiet group. Okay, well, if there are no questions, then I guess we will give you all 20 minutes back in your day. We are usually very fast. We always say we should book 30 minutes and then we book an hour anyways. But thank you so much for coming. If anyone's interested in some of these slides, would be happy to share them. And otherwise, I hope you all.
I see, Leah, I see Stephanie's hand up.
Sorry,
No,
the 11th
so
hour.
happy.
I do have a question. Okay.
We're so happy.
So
we're
the
so
360 feedback, it's timely for us because Jen, who's also I think on this webinar as well, and I are working on putting together something for our team for the first time. Wondering if you have any tips. We've worked out some of our our skills, our competencies for our roles, but how does that get incorporated into a 360 feedback in an effective way where you're where it's also like right sized. If you're asking a bunch of different people for their feedback on an individual, like, are they, is it useful to ask them about specific skills that the person is demonstrating, or like what's an effective way to do it that isn't like super onerous and like over engineered?
Yeah, I agree. I think you don't want to over engineer it. I think that's a really valid point. I think, the way I would do it is the people leader is going to know the skills that that individual was working on improving. And that's where I would focus. The skills someone's good at, you don't need to ask about that. The skills you already know someone's struggling with, you also don't really need to ask about that. You need to have your plan. So I would ask about those skills someone is working on throughout the year that are relevant to their role, and ask targeted questions around those skills that you've identified to be in the center for each person. Of course, that means that you have to have had some performance evaluation done up front. So if that is even too onerous, then what I would do is just pick the top 3 to 5 skills for each role and ask people about those. I think it's important, if you're doing it that way, to ask about the same set of skills if you're not going to focus on the skills that someone's working on improving.
Great, that's super helpful. Thank you.
No problem. And I see there's also a question in the chat. So who should be involved in these processes? That is a great question. It's obviously going to depend on the company, because different companies are of different size. But I think it's always HR and the people leaders of that specific department. So depending on how big your company is, if every people leader only runs their own thing, then I think HR can work directly with each person. But if you have like four engineering managers, I would work with those 4 engineering managers together with HR and just make sure that people in the same role are experiencing the same process across the organization, and that engineering manager 1's not doing it one way and the second one's doing it another way, because we know people talk and this will just create an uneven process. So I would say it's people leaders, it's HR, and of course you want buy-in from leadership on how everyone is doing it before you go and execute. Awesome. Any more questions? Oh, yes, we do. Part 2. Oh, how long would something like that take?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it depends what your starting point is, and how big your company is. Sorry, that's a vague answer. But if we're looking at most small tech startups, if you're getting a tool, like you can get the skills for the people and the skills for roles in, I want to say 2 weeks, but that's really ambitious. Let's say 4 weeks to get, the skills down. And you can at the same time be developing the review process. So I would say, like, if you're really committed and in a bind, like you could do it in as little as 4 weeks with the support of the right tool. And happy to, I don't want to be salesy, but like happy to show you our tool and how we can help you in that, of course, and getting it done really quickly. Awesome. Any other questions? Super. Well, if you do have other questions, that is my email. And I also answer LinkedIn messages really, really quickly. So happy to continue the conversation and connect with anyone who does offline. Otherwise, have a great day.